Chapter 11. High-Stakes Takedown. The precinct was a hive of activity, a stark contrast to the silence that had cloaked Lena Walsh and Marcus Dalton during their escape. Officers moved in hurried chaos, briefing one another, readying tactical gear, and loading vehicles. Captain Briggs stood at the center of it all, issuing orders with the precision of a battlefield general. "Everyone knows their assignments," he said, his voice firm. "This isn't just a raid, it's a statement. We're taking the Rossi family down tonight." Lena leaned against a table nearby, exhausted but focused. The evidence Marcus had helped gather, combined with Daniel's reluctant confession, had been enough to secure warrants for the Rossi estate, their warehouses, and several of their fronts. This was it, the culmination of years of work and sacrifices. Marcus sat on a bench, hunched over, his head in his hands. He looked up as Lena approached, his face pale. "You really think this is going to work?" "It has to," Lena said simply. Marcus shook his head. "Dominic's not going down without a fight. He's always got a backup plan." "So do we," Lena replied. She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Stay here. Let us handle the rest." Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Be careful." Lena turned away, her resolve hardening. She'd come too far to let fear slow her down now. The Rossi estate was dark when the convoy of unmarked police vehicles rolled through the gates. The operation was swift and calculated. Officers moved in silence, their weapons drawn, their movements practiced. Lena led the charge, her heart pounding as she approached the front doors. "Move," she said quietly, motioning to the breaching team. With a sharp crack, the door was forced open, and the officers poured inside, sweeping the grand entryway. The air was heavy with tension, every corner, every shadow, a potential threat. Lena's voice cut through the comms. "Ground floor clear, proceeding to the west wing." As she moved through the estate, memories of the Rossi family's influence on the city swirled in her mind. She thought of Chris, of her brother, of every victim whose life had been shattered by their empire. Tonight, she would make it count. In the study, Dominic Rossi sat calmly behind his desk, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand. Maria stood near the window, her face tight with anger, as she watched the police storm the grounds. "They're here," Maria said. "I know," Dominic replied, his voice calm. "Let them come." "We can still fight our way out," Maria pressed. "Call Luciano. He's got men who can—" "No," Dominic interrupted, his tone sharp. "This isn't a battle we win with guns. Let them take what they think they've won." Maria's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue further. Dominic's calm unnerved her, but she trusted his instincts. She always had. Lena entered the study moments later, her gun drawn, her team fanning out behind her. Dominic raised his hands in mock surrender, the smirk on his face as infuriating as it was chilling. "Detective Walsh," he said, his tone mocking. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Hands on the desk, Dominic," Lena said, her voice steady. Dominic complied slowly, setting his glass down. "You finally got your moment. Congratulations." "Where's Maria?" Lena asked, her eyes scanning the room. "Gone," Dominic said simply. "She always was smarter than me." Lena's grip on her gun tightened, but she held her ground. "It's over, Dominic. The evidence we have will bury you and your entire operation." Dominic chuckled. "You think this is the end? I'm not the one pulling the strings, Walsh. I never was." Lena's jaw clenched. "We'll see." As her team cuffed Dominic and began securing the room, Lena's comm buzzed in her ear. "Detective Walsh, we found something in the West Wing. You need to see this." In the West Wing, a hidden room had been uncovered behind a false wall. Inside, Lena found stacks of ledgers, hard drives, and files documenting the Rossi family's operations in excruciating detail. Names, dates, transactions. It was everything she'd been fighting to uncover. Her breath caught as she scanned the documents. The depth of their corruption was staggering, but there was something else. A single file marked with a red tab stood out. She opened it, her eyes widening as she read. This wasn't just about the Rossi family. The file named several prominent figures in the city, politicians, business leaders, even members of law enforcement, who had been complicit in their crimes. Lena stepped back, her mind racing. This wasn't just a takedown, it was a reckoning. Back at the precinct, the mood was electric. Dominic Rossi was in custody. The raid had been a success, and the evidence recovered was already being cataloged. But Lena couldn't shake the unease gnawing at her. In the interrogation room, Dominic sat calmly, his hands cuffed, his expression unreadable. Lena entered, closing the door behind her. "You wanted me to find that file," she said, her voice low. Dominic smirked. "I wanted you to see the truth." "And what truth is that?" Lena asked. Dominic leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "You think taking me down changes anything? The people in that file, they're the real power in this city. I'm just the middleman." "You're a criminal," Lena said, her voice cold. "And now you're going to pay for it." Dominic's smirk widened. "Maybe. But ask yourself this, detective. What happens when you expose them? How long do you think you'll last when the people you trust turn on you?" Lena stared at him, her heart pounding. She hated that his words held a kernel of truth, but she pushed the doubt aside. "I'll take my chances," she said, turning to leave. As she walked away, Dominic's voice followed her. "Good luck, Walsh. You'll need it." Later that night, Lena sat in her car outside the precinct, the weight of the file heavy in her hands. She thought of Marcus, of Chris, of everyone who had been hurt by the Rossi family and the system that had enabled them. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, she felt like she had a fighting chance. As she started the car and drove into the night, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't done. Not by a long shot.